Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Women Work COVID. The future is still female. My name is Ann Gemmel. I'm the founder of Future Works Alliance Philadelphia. It is a civic platform for citizens to align and co-design solutions for the future of work playbook that our region needs if we're going to have an inclusive economy that provides opportunity for everyone to thrive. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today to build space for so many smart and accomplished women. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. The Philadelphia Citizen is solutions-based journalism. They are a co-host. The Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia is primo co-host. They're going to be giving us some facts and data, some of the landscape about where we are. And last but not least, Chariot Solutions, software company, amazing leader, Tracy Wilson-Rossmann, has been a partner in getting this done today. The Future Works Alliance, this is our first event, Future Works Alliance Philadelphia. Welcome, thank you for joining us. The Future Works Alliance is a space, a civic space for people to design solutions, as I mentioned. And we see the current crisis, the pandemic, as a real accelerant. It has brought the future front and center. It has hastened digital transformation. And to put it bluntly, the future is here and we're not really ready. And so we need to quickly collaborate. Government, business, institutions, citizens, workers need to bring their voice to a common space and collaborate around solutions. And that's really the goal for today, to demonstrate that there's no single entity that's going to solve the problems and prepare us for the future of work. It really will take many perspectives, many voices, many sets of expertise to weigh in and co-design solutions that will prepare us and design the future of work playbook. So many things in the pandemic became acute that were long-standing problems. They suddenly landed on our doorstep. First and foremost, today, we see that women are carrying a lot more of the care infrastructure in our society, particularly Black women and Hispanic women are in low-wage jobs, and they were decimated by the pandemic. And so these problems give us the opportunity to learn lessons and prepare for the future of work, which is rapidly approaching. So just a bit of housekeeping before I introduce our rock star Congresswoman who's here with us today. All of our questions and commentary, please put that in the chat. This is being recorded and we will be able to watch this and share this widely after the event. And we're going to do our level best to get to all of your questions, even if it's not during the event. We will be tending to your questions and they will live on the website, on the Future Works Alliance website after the event. So again, welcome. The goals here today are to demonstrate collaboration and to set us up for a better future that addresses some of the problems that we really felt acutely during the pandemic. I'm so excited to introduce Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. I first heard her voice on the radio during the 2020 election, and she was the first congressperson I heard talking about the future of work so powerfully, so cogently. Please welcome Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. She's a representative from Delaware, which I think for me was really important because we need to solve these problems from a commuter zone perspective, recognizing how humans use the economy, how workers travel across the commuter zone. She is the assistant whip for House leadership. Her bio and resume is unbelievable. She has so much experience across so many policy issues. She's the real deal. She has led things and she has gotten stuff done. I'm so happy that she started the Future of Work conversation in Congress as the founder of the Congressional Future of Work Caucus. Please welcome Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Ann, for that introduction to the Future Works Alliance, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, Chariot Solutions, Philadelphia Citizen, all of the sponsors. Thank you for pulling together today's program. And to each and every one of you watching, good morning. The theme is Women, Work, and COVID. The future is still female. And the goal today is for each of you to gain some insights, to go from crisis to solutions, and really to find your part in the times that we live. You'll be hearing this morning more, about these issues in deep detail, but we all know the statistics. I mean, we all know that since the pandemic began, over 2.5 million women have lost their jobs. And according to CNBC, in December alone, women accounted for 100% of jobs lost in this country. That's staggering. And just as the health impacts of COVID-19 have had a disproportionate impact, so too have the economic consequences. Vice President Harris, and it feels really good to say, Vice President Kamala Harris, calls this moment of women leaving the workforce a national emergency. But we all know this is not new. Since the days of Bridgerton, women, and especially women of color and trans women, have been fighting for a seat at the table. And so today, we are here to remember that the work continues and to find our part in it. We know that one of the primary drivers of women being out of the workforce is inadequate access to affordable and reliable childcare. Given that women are often the primary caregivers, as Anne has mentioned, many are tasked with choosing between caring for loved ones or keeping their job. And beyond job losses, beyond the pandemic even began, women, and especially women of color, were disproportionately represented in low-wage jobs. So as the economic downturn happened, as COVID happened, it made it even more challenging. So knowing that this mass exodus of women from the workforce is a national crisis, it is incumbent upon all of us to look at national and local solutions. And coming up with those solutions, one of the reasons why I began the first of its kind bipartisan Future Work Caucus is because when I started in Congress in 2017, which I had never run for anything in my life. And so stick a pin in that and say to yourself, what is my role now? When I started noticing that many of the conversations would go back to the future of work, whether it was looking at labor and jobs, whether it was looking at farming. Delaware is an agriculture state. And so I went into a home of a farmer, and this woman actually had an iPad where she was controlling her crops. All of these different things were happening. But when I attended a session on automation that was focused on autonomous vehicles, I started thinking about the impact that the shifts were having on women, especially, and people of color. That if these jobs, like driving a bus or a truck, were no longer there, what impact would that have on people's families? What impact would that have on our education system? And so that's what really got me inspired. But it was really COVID-19 that pushed telework, that pushed distance learning, that pushed telehealth, but also that showed the inequities and the inequalities and the disparities that exist in our healthcare system, that exist in our jobs, and who has to go on the front lines. All of that was shown clearly through that. I thought it was going to be automation, machine learning, quantum learning, all of those things, but it was really COVID-19 that magnified it. But what was interesting was our response as a country. It pushed us to actually act on things that we already knew we should have been doing. It pushed us through the CARES Act to scale up programs and expand programs like childcare services and investment in that sector as employment. Well-known things like expansion of unemployment benefits, paid sick time and sick leave, direct payments to families. Those are some of the things that you know, but then there are other things like providing $45 million to family violence prevention service programs. The CARES Act was a critical down payment that COVID pushed. And now we just passed the American Rescue Plan. The bottom line is that the economy will never fully recover without the full participation of women and all women. The American Rescue Plan has in it things that are going to help to lift children and families out of poverty. Everything from the expansion of direct payments, which I worked on and focused on, to the expansion of the child tax credit for $3,000 per child, to a $40 million investment in our child care assistance programs. The American Rescue Plan meets the urgency of the need. It is estimated that half of our children will be lifted out of poverty, reopening schools, reopening businesses. And even this week in Congress, we will be passing the Violence Against Women Act and the Equal Rights Amendment. But what I want to focus on as I get to the end of these remarks is the fact that one of the things that Ann didn't mention is that in addition to being the Congresswoman from Delaware, I was born in Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia, and I can tell you that in the past year, I had the opportunity to attend a roundtable at a church where my grandmother attended for over 5 decades. It was just a few blocks from her house in North Philly, which was once public housing, where she raised 4 children on her own as a caretaker, doing healthcare work, doing all kinds of things. But during that roundtable, it was interesting to me, and it saddened me, and it also propelled me, because I saw individuals who talked about the challenges that we still face. An education system that has not lived up to its obligations for our children. Shared prosperity has not been shared by all. Gun violence in our communities. When I listened to the people around that roundtable, what I heard were the words of Fannie Lou Hamer: people that are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I began this talk by talking about seats at the table. And I'm always reminded of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to become a Congresswoman, who said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Well, it is time for us as women and as allies to not just bring our own seat to the table, but to bring multiple seats to the table, to the economic table, to the justice table, to the peace table, to the education table. We need to bring several seats, because we know that in order for us to have a future that is bright, all boats must be lifted. All of us must be lifted. And 3 things have defined these past 12 months for many of us. It will shape us forever as a country. A pandemic that has highlighted the inequities and the disparities. The murder of George Floyd that has also pushed in people's face, if you never knew it before, the challenges that we have in our justice system. And an insurrection, which threatened our own democracy, and for some of us, our own safety. The future of work is bigger than technology. It is about us as a people. What do we believe? What do we say we believe? George Floyd's murder, to me, is symbolic of what I say to companies, to individuals, as we hold up the mirror to ourselves and our organizations. It is about the 4 A's. It is about awareness. First of all, being aware that we have a problem, whether it is women in the workforce or how we treat people of color. Awareness. Secondly, you have to acknowledge it. You could not get away with not acknowledging what you saw on those 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Awareness, acknowledge. As a company, be aware, acknowledge. But if you acknowledge, don't stop there. Action is the 3rd A. You must act. Because if you don't, you have now doubly offended me. Now I know you know, and you are still not acting on it, whatever those isms are. And the 4th A is accountability. We must hold ourselves and each other accountable. As we go into the future of work, which is now, I am always hopeful. I'm a pragmatic optimist. And I believe that conversations like this and uncomfortable conversations allow us to get to that new day where each and every one of us has a seat at the table, where each and every one of us feels valued and worthy, where each and every one of us has an opportunity to thrive. I thank you for the opportunity to speak before you. I hope that you get something special from today and that you carry it on, redouble our efforts so that we can all have a future that works for all of us. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I don't need a second cup of coffee anymore. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you gave us some time. I was writing down the 4 A's. I'm going to put it on a vision board, visible in my house. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your time. And I know you're going to be busy, so take care of yourself, self-care in that busy week. Yes. Busy 2 years is what you're going to have. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Wow. Yeah. So that was wonderful. I knew I would love having her, and that was just great. Next up, we have an equally amazing woman leader from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Ashley Putnam is the director of the Economic Growth and Mobility Project. And I could tell story upon story, but we don't have time. I'm just going to let her do her thing, and you will see for yourself that she's awesome too. Ashley, take it away for some level setting on the facts and the data for us.
Thank you so much, Anne. And what an act to follow. Congresswoman really set the tone for some of the critical issues that we're going to be talking about. So my role here today is really just to kind of bring us into the economic reasons for in this conversation. The reasons why the Philadelphia Fed has been partnering with the Future Works Alliance and Chariot Solutions to lift up this really important topic. And the reason why we really need to start thinking critically about where women are in the future of work. So I'm going to share my screen with you here. Give me 1 second. Great. Wonderful. So as Anne mentioned, I lead an initiative called the Economic Growth and Mobility Project. I do have to give my standard Fed disclaimer that my views here are mine alone and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Philadelphia Fed or the Federal Reserve System. That's something I get to say every time I speak with you all. The work that I do is really to think strategically about equal access to opportunity for all. And the conversation we're having today is really focused on a conversation we've been having for this past year. How do we center equity and recovery? That's thinking across infrastructure like childcare, workforce development, and job creation. So we're at a pretty critical moment for our economy. We're looking at a whole list of things that are happening to women. Everything from inequality that was really increasing prior to the pandemic, jobs that have been lost in sectors that are mostly female, automation and the way work has been changing and has been accelerated by the pandemic. And as we heard from the Congresswoman, the care burden and childcare burden that falls disproportionately on women. So I want to kind of dig into the data and really frame out this problem that we're talking about today. So just to level set, the problems we're talking about were happening prior to the pandemic. We know that wage disparities have existed. They're particularly disproportionate when we look at the earnings of Black women and Latinx women. We know that occupational segregation is something that has been here prior to COVID-19, that women, and particularly women of color, are disproportionately represented in the kinds of jobs that are often lacking in benefits, remote work, and some of these work supports. And the care disparities were here long before COVID. We know women and girls globally are responsible for up to 3/4 of unpaid care work. And that's not just childcare. More than 1 in 10 US parents as of 2018 is also caring for an adult. And so that care burden falls disproportionately on women in both sets. So I want to talk about 2 major trends today, and I think this will really lead nicely into the panel and the conversation happening later. One is the increase in job loss and unemployment for women, and the second is decreasing labor force participation, which is a major concern. So prior to the pandemic, we did some studies on automation. That's actually how we started collaborating with folks here, thinking about who would be most impacted. We saw that women of color, Black or African-American, Hispanic or Latino, people who are either younger or older workers are in high-risk jobs that are high risk to be automated. We did a study last year that showed that those trends have actually accelerated. So if we're going to talk about the future of work, we need to talk about racial and gender equity. And that is why we are here today. We also know that the occupations most at risk in COVID-19 were jobs that were predominantly held by women: retail salespersons, supervisors of retail sales workers, cashiers, waiters and waitresses. This is actually some data that we pulled at the very beginning of the pandemic. And what is really astounding to me about this is the economic conditions of those workers. I've highlighted some numbers here for our 3rd district. That includes Delaware and New Jersey. So really the region around here being $23,000. The percentage of women working less than 35 hours a week without health insurance, that are housing burdened, living below the poverty line, right? These are major concerns. And finally, when we look at unemployment, this is a study that we did, my colleague Keith Wardrop did, and came out in January. We really do see some major percentage point declines that are being driven by Black women and Hispanic women with a high school degree or less. And so you can see that on the left-hand side, that represents this area, that light blue color, and is really a concern then for people who are non-college degree holders, particularly women of color. So let's talk about the second piece of this, the labor force participation. Many of us have seen the headlines. We know that from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, women's labor force participation is at its lowest level since 1987, and that nearly 2.2 million women have left the workforce. Our colleagues at the Chicago Fed really dug into this and said, is this true? Is labor force participation declining, particularly for women and for working mothers? And what they found was, yes, women with no kids versus women with kids, we do see a real significant percentage point decline as it impacts working women, even compared to men with children. I think what is most compelling, however, about the Chicago Fed study is that they found that the largest impact has been on Black women, women who are single, women who are non-college educated. And again, mirroring those widening employment disparities we've seen in the broader labor market since March. Now, one of the reasons that we have talked about is the care burden. This is a survey that the Boston Consulting Group did that I found extremely compelling, and I'm happy to share these slides to dig into this a little bit more. But what was amazing to me was that when they surveyed people in 2020, 60% of the caregivers responding had no outside help. And even as mothers and fathers were stepping up, women were still spending 15 hours more each week on domestic work. And close to half of the respondents felt that their performance at work had decreased as a result of additional care responsibilities. So this is what this pandemic is doing. This is what it is revealing to us. We know that nearly 40% of childcare centers were at risk early in the pandemic. And so as women are taking on more of a caregiving burden, we're also looking at a major crisis in the childcare system. Now, one final thing I want to make sure that we have clear as we start into the conversation is the importance of the intersection at race and gender. This is a lesson from 2008. The National Women's Law Center did a really compelling study where they looked at Black women's unemployment and the changes before and after the recovery. And one of the most compelling things is that they found that Black women's unemployment rate actually rose compared significantly to women overall and white women. And again, Black women actually lost jobs in the recovery, even more so than they did in the recession. And so what this means to me is, yes, we are here to talk about gender equity and the importance of centering women in our recovery, but we also have to be very conscious about the intersection of race and gender and the women who are most impacted. So a final thing I want to conclude with is why. Why are we having this conversation? Why does it matter to the economy? Our colleagues at the San Francisco Fed came out with an incredibly compelling study earlier this year that showed that we have seen economic losses in this country to racial and gender disparities at the tune of $2.6 trillion. And you see that going up in time. So this isn't just a conversation about the morally correct thing to do or a good thing to do for women. This is a conversation about something necessary in our economy for all of us. And so for me, this means to build back a more economy and recovery, we must center the women who have most been impacted, a better future work. Thank you so much to everyone for having us. I'm excited for today and look forward to some of the solutions that you'll be lifting up. Thank you. And I believe I am bringing on Roxanne, who is going to be introducing our panel. Is that right, Emma?
Hi, Ashley. Great job. Yes, I'm going to introduce Roxanne. Roxanne is awesome editor. Roxanne Patel Shepalavi will be moderating our awesome panel. And Roxanne should be up on the screen soon. She has won awards for her journalism and magazine articles on many, many topics, both local and national. And now she directs all the editorial operations at the Philadelphia Citizen, which is a wonderful platform for solutions-based journalism, a very innovative approach to the disruption that we're from technology that we're seeing in journalism. The Philadelphia Citizen is also where I write future-proofing columns. So Roxanne, we're looking for you to come up and introduce the panel.
Hi, welcome to everybody, and thanks, Anne. This is incredible, and I'm really happy to be here. As Anne mentioned, I'm executive editor and co-executive director of the Philadelphia Citizen, which is a civic-minded media outlet here in Philly. And we are always looking for solutions. That's what we do, and I think this panel of incredible women is going to offer that to you. So let me just take a minute to introduce the women who are hopefully on screen with you. I think I can see all of you except I can't see Tiffany, but hopefully she'll be showing up in just a second here.
Hi, here.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi.
So Marissa Gilbert, oh, you can see her name there, is Managing Director in Accenture Strategies, Talent and Organization Practice, where she spent the last 20 years partnering with clients on complex talent-related initiatives. And has a particular passion around leadership development and the future of work. She's also been involved in leading some of Accenture's internal changes, which is, so she can see firsthand how you change a company of 500,000 plus employees, which is will be an interesting perspective for us, and is also a mom of 2 toddlers. Tiffany Fields is a senior manager for people and culture at Exyn Technologies, a robotics startup in Philadelphia with 54 employees. You have to look them up. They do really cool stuff. She started there in July, so in the midst of the pandemic, as their first ever HR person. And she is also a working mom with a baby. And I bring that up with both of these instances because these are women who are clearly walking the talk here, right? Having to mom and work, which many of us understand. Tracy Wilson-Rossmann is a founding member and chief marketing officer at Chariot Solutions, an enterprise application and mobile development consulting firm with over 50 employees. She's also founder of Tech Girls, which you also should look up. It's awesome. It's a nonprofit dedicated to inspiring teenage girls to consider careers in technology. And she's a founding member of Philly Startup Leaders. So we could spend all morning with any one of these women, but we have a short period of time, so I'm gonna kind of jump in here. Tracy, I want to start with you. So Chariot has been recognized as a top place to work in Philadelphia, and I get the sense that that's sort of baked into the founding of the business, right? So you mentioned that you and your partner started the company 19 years ago when you had small children, and sort of made decisions informed by that. So you didn't necessarily have to pivot during the pandemic. Can you talk about what kinds of things that meant and what that means now?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. You know, during this time period, people would be asking me, oh, did Chariot have to go remote? And I said, well, we've always done remote work. It's not been something that's been foreign to us. And the other thing that wasn't foreign to us was the idea of flex time. So the point of us being able to trust the people who work for us. So even though Chariot is comprised mostly of men, the flexibility in the scheduling has been important because a lot of my male coworkers are married to working women. And I think that it's an important point for us to get across that we're still having impact even though, our office is male dominated, but our policies are impacting their families. So we're allowing our employees to have that ability to be flexible, either working from home or maybe taking a half day so that they can go home to look after their kids, do after school programs. And I think that's part of one of the reasons why we've been one of the top workplaces, because of the trust that we have in our employees to get their work done when it makes sense for them and their schedules. And then also that flexibility has allowed them to be there for their families. And during this time period, there was no pivot, as you mentioned. We just kept continuing. The mindset shift was really with some of our clients. So, I think that moving forward, this is going to be important for businesses to understand that this remote work and the flexibility that it gives is not only just impactful for your employees, but impactful and flows down to their families.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's, I like this idea that you're supporting women through the people you have there, which may not be a lot of women, but are people who have women in their lives, right? And so they also need to be supported. Marissa, let me go to you, sort of the other extreme of things here. So Accenture is a giant behemoth of a company, right? 500,000 plus employees all over the world. Mm-hmm. So, future planning, making any kind of change really requires kind of turning a tank, right? It's not as nimble as a startup or another small company. So what are a couple of things Accenture has done during, but even before the pandemic, to address the future of work, sort of with an eye to increasing success for women?
Yeah, great question. And I'd like to start off by also saying thank you so much to Anne and you and the whole team for being here today. I really appreciate the focus on solutioning and sharing ideas. So to jump into your question, Roxanne, I would say there are probably three things that I could share here. And I fully recognize most people do not work for companies with 500,000 plus people, but hopefully there are some tidbits in here that may resonate or relate. The first is that I really believe if you're making any sort of big or major change, that there has to be a clear vision and a clear commitment from the very top of the organization, and that it has to be built into an overarching business strategy. And then it needs to go to several levels down within those levels of leadership to really make the change. And so a quick example I can give here, if I pull back the curtain a bit on Accenture, is several years ago, we shared the notion that we would like to get to a gender balanced workforce by 2025, so a 50-50 gender split. And what we did in 2016 is to actually be the first professional services firm to go out and publicly state our data with full transparency to say, here's where we are. We know we have a lot of work to do to get to that bold goal, but we are putting it out here because, to use the Congresswoman's term around accountability, we know that being transparent will help us be accountable. So I think that's a very key piece. And then internal to Accenture, our CEO has quarterly meetings with all of us as leaders to share how we're doing so we can trickle that down into the organization. I think the second thing that's been really important for us as we make change is focusing on community building and really using that to make a large organization feel small and feel like people have different homes and families within the company. And so an example here is we have a very large amount of employee resource groups, or ERGs, on all different topics. And they are very active. And the reason we put, I would say, so much into these ERGs is because we are then able to drive change and action from these groups of people who are usually lower levels within the organization, and then they can feel like they are a part of the change. So as the pandemic happened, they were able to brainstorm, as working parents, what could we do to balance and things like that. And then, related to various topics on diversity. And the last piece I'll share here that I think is important is really putting a focus on, as you're going through any sort of change, and especially right now as you want to retain the folks that you have and the women that you have, thinking through what is that employee experience that they are going through. And we, through our research, came up with a framework that we use to help people be their best at work. And that framework that we use is, we say that people need to feel seen, safe, connected, and courageous. And so a number of the actions that we do are all in the nature of making people feel those things.
So, and do you know, have you set up metrics for knowing whether these things have worked? I mean, is there going to be some of those check-ins? Yeah.
So we have not only put it out on those metrics on our website, but we keep a running, I think it's now 5-year view where you can just, Google Accenture and diversity and see where we've gone, where we're at. We still have room to go, but we are definitely making progress. And I very much believe some of that is because of our transparency. And then from a leadership perspective, Julie shares with us internally every quarter to see how we're doing so that we can help her make progress in the organization.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that is it's interesting that it's from the top all the way down through the company, which seems to be part of what's key here, right?
Exactly.
So Tiffany, I know you started in the summer, but talk a little bit about how Exyn, which is it's a tech company, and you think of tech startups are places that we think of as being flexible and sort of forward thinking, obviously. So talk a little bit about how at Exyn, things have changed during the pandemic and how that's going to continue afterwards.
Yeah, so I would also like to echo the thank yous for having me. This is such an important topic to me, both personally and then just in the Philadelphia community, and I think across the world as we know it now. And so I'm happy to be here. So I joined Exyn in July, and one thing we do know of tech companies is that they often pride themselves on agility. Exyn being one of them. And so Exyn, I actually initially interviewed with a company in April, and they decided to put the role on hold. And I then went and just joined the company in July. And so one thing I will say to the credit of the company is that they do, I think they're amazing at tech and the skill sets that push the product forward. But in terms of maybe people and culture, they realized that maybe there was a gap. And so when I came into the organization, there was such an openness and willingness to back all of maybe the initiatives that support families and just the entire workforce in general. So we did create ERGs, and I think that has been it's been really impactful for the people within those ERGs. I will say that when you're you're meeting with your group, it could be an hour or so, and you feel really safe, and then you leave your ERG and you're back to your daily work, and you need to feel supported. Maybe you're not. I know that when I'm in one of the meetings and I'm talking with some of the other women, I may not talk with them on a daily basis, and I don't work with them on a daily basis, and so having the opportunity to have those conversations and then take what I learn in that group. And then I'm also a woman of color, so I'm in another ERG. And so taking this information and actually being able to make it actionable and apply it to making the people in the workforce feel safe, I think has been huge. Flexibility is something that has not always been a thing, I think, at Exyn. So historically, the employees have been in the office, but our leadership team has really opened up to the thought of making sure that, there are core hours throughout the day, but there are things that people still need to attend to. So whether that's childcare or your mental health, and they have really pushed that. Having this come from the top down, both our COO and our CTO are very forward thinking. I think they have really positioned themselves as allies. And so they're pushing for things like longer parental leave and they're the first ones to say in the morning time, daycare is closed, so I may be away for the day. So I think just having that executive backing has been really huge for us.
So, Marissa, I'm going to come back to you for a minute. So your CEO, Julie Sweet, is the first female leader of Accenture, right? Of all of Accenture.
Yep.
And recently named #1 on Fortune's Most Powerful Woman list, which is pretty awesome.
Yes.
And leadership, all of you have talked about leadership, and it's something that you focus on a lot in your work, with both at Accenture and you're a board member of Leadership Philadelphia, right? So tell me, and I think probably everybody in the room here feels this, but if you can articulate a little bit why it's important to have women in leadership in companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's, data out there that talks to women in CEO or senior leadership positions and how that ties to business performance, which I fully believe. But I think that the key thing from my vantage point is that the more women we can have in leadership positions, it, blazes the trail, as we say, for all the women to come. And, I believe whether it is women aspiring to leadership positions or any other aspect of diversity that we talk about, we need folks to see that there are people that look like them above them, right? So that they know they can get there and that there isn't that glass ceiling that has been there for decades. And so I think that's the most key thing. And then with that comes the diversity of thought, the diversity of behavior, and quite frankly, just the diversity of leadership, right? When you've got women in the ranks and in the most senior ranks. And if I look at Julie as an example, she's incredible. And I would say two of the things that make her the most incredible are her focus on a culture of learning, which is really critical, as we talked about earlier, automation and the future of work, right? All of us being able to continually learn, whether it's for ourselves or helping those in our organization, is really key. And then she also very much pushes this idea of collaboration across all of Accenture, which, as you can imagine, being so large, is not something that we've always, had a muscle to do well. We've worked in silos, but she has come into this position and I think used her leadership opportunity here to say, we are really going to push to work across to bring the best for all of us and for our clients.
Yeah, interesting. So Tracy, you've been working in tech for
long time. I'll just leave it at that.
For some time, and so you still it's still an industry that is primarily male, and you're trying to solve that by working with middle schoolers, in tech girls, but sort of how do you this is clearly something that we're seeing, that we need to get more women in these fields that are these sort of professional fields that have like long career, high paying careers. So what is needed to do that? How do we do that?
Well, since I don't have like 3 hours right now,
Yeah.
I'll try and
quickly, if you could just do that in like a couple seconds.
Exactly, I can, and then I'll take all more, please. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. One, we need to expand the definition of what a technologist is. Technology is not just about software development, which of course is how I make my living. So I don't want to be to give that any short shrift, but we need to understand that technology is also hardware development and network and game development and QA and product managers, data scientists, data engineers, data analysts. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on. And we need, as a culture, to have that understanding that there's all these possibilities. And I actually loved what the Congresswoman said at the beginning when she said she went to see a farmer and that farmer was using an iPad. And I just tweeted this out, but one of our tech girls had said this 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the idea that women and other underrepresented people who haven't been in tech, it is about the innovation that we are missing, the different ways of looking at problems, approaching them. So technology is not just about the bits and bytes, but it is also about how you're using it, thinking about process and using technology to solve problems, not the other way around. We need to think broader. And from a cultural, as I said, from a cultural standpoint, we need to continue to believe and promote that women are smart, that women can like science and math and can combine technology and marketing. We need to really throw out old ways of thinking. So I think that that is one of the biggest pieces that we can start with.
One of the things that strikes me is that I think that last point is absolutely true, but it also strikes me, and you touched on this, that I would add to the skills needed in work like yours is you need people who can be good writers, right? Good communicators, which are sometimes very different skills than the people who can do the programming. And you need people who...
But programmers need to be good communicators as well. So there's definitely been a change in the thought process of soft skills, and really this blending of skill sets. And even though I don't write code, I still do a tiny little bit of coding on a website. So I don't have to know everything. I don't know how to fix a car, but I know how to diagnose it and talk about it. And I think that's something that we also need to be, we need to encourage women to feel that they are part of this, because some of the things that I see and hear from stories are this lack of understanding and, you know, oh, you're a database administrator, you're not a techie. And then women are questioning themselves. And that is a huge problem. And that makes you feel like you don't belong.
Right.
So we need to take all of that out.
Yeah.
And hopefully by opening up and making everyone who is working with technology and their company is dependent on their understanding of different technologies, we need to, you know, open up the tent and include everyone and make them feel welcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, so I have a couple more questions, but I wanted to just say that if anybody out there has a question that they want to put into the chat, I'm happy to also take some questions from people. So if you have some for the women here, please do throw that into the chat here. So Tiffany, so you're in a really interesting position because, you know, you're the first HR person at Exxon. And so you're kind of starting from scratch, right? I mean, obviously there was some kind of company culture, but they made a very conscious decision to bring you in, and perhaps a conscious decision to bring in a woman of color to this position. And so you have this sort of amazing opportunity to shape how the company approaches not just gender, but also sort of racial equity, inclusion. And, you know, what are some principles that sort of inform those policies? It's just sort of like, you don't have to change. I mean, you're not necessarily changing something, you're creating something, right? Which is a kind of a nice place to be. So how do you start?
So I think I would agree. So there's an advantage that I have as a woman, and then as a woman of color, there are things that I see, and Exxon, or tech in general, is a male-dominated industry. And so coming into a place, it has been a privilege, but it has been one where I see that so many people who look like me don't have access to the same opportunities. And so in looking at HR, I think you start with talent acquisition, and when you talk about diversity, it is only ensuring that people of different backgrounds are there, but then you need to retain them. And so it's looking at the performance objectives and systems, it's looking at compensation, it's looking at the benefits, it's looking at every single area of people operations and HR, and ensuring that there is actual equity and inclusion. And so it's making sure that you know, you are valuing and you're you're teaching things like radical candor and making sure that if there are things that are maybe inappropriate or that need to be addressed, that someone feels comfortable or they feel that they have the power to address those things. And so it's really, when you think about, again, having the executive leadership, it's making sure that they are okay with also receiving some information or some feedback that they, may not have been aware of, or that may be surprising to them. But it's really just making sure that, we're looking at every area of the organization and making sure that every single person, women, person of color, has access to the same opportunity as their male and or white counterparts. And I think that that's huge, but especially in an organization where it's kind of something that I think a lot of the employees already value, or they're open to understanding some of the systemic barriers that have maybe prevented people that look like me from being in a space as such. And so having them have this understanding and be willing to open up to learning more, I think is really big.
And then from your perspective, you have to be sort of patient and willing to teach, right? Yeah. So there has to be that. It's both sides have to give and be open.
Yeah, I do agree. So one thing I think people will always say is, this is a system that, wasn't created by women or people of color when you think about systemic barriers. And so sometimes people will say, well, it isn't my job to teach you. But in the event where someone maybe isn't open to learning, I think going the extra mile or just teaching someone or opening someone up to something that they maybe just didn't know, I think just helps really close the gap maybe sooner than it otherwise would have been.
Yeah. So we have a question from Katie Schuer in the audience, who wonders, and this I think is for anybody, how do you see asynchronous work influencing really female caretakers' ability to work while balancing family life? So I don't know, is it who feels like they can answer that?
I mean, I can start from 4 times. I do not have children at home, but was working before, we had this remote work opportunities and Zoom and all of those things. And I guess I was doing asynchronous work at that point as well. And that gave me the ability, if I could log on later. I mean, listen, it stretched my work day. That's for any parent that's out there. But sometimes your context switching, but it gave me the ability to, do a pickup, be home for a day off, take my kids to the office, when that was a possibility. So I think that flexibility was really important for me. And I was doing that before Chariot as well. I think as much as a company can be flexible and think about their policies and how it affects women as caretakers in their family life is really going to be important. Maybe it's just setting up different hours. It's job sharing. It's a lot of things that have been in the ethos that employers may have been unwilling or cautious about trying. I also want to throw in a big point of mine, which is businesses need to do this because as much as the unemployment rate is, higher than it has been, the Biden administration is working back towards full employment. So that means we've got to be flexible. And if, as employers, as business owners, we need to be flexible to accommodate that goal.
So, so speaking to that though, this American Relief Act has a lot of benefits in there for children. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that strikes me is that what women really need, caretakers really need, is childcare. I mean, how do any of you have thoughts on how, cities or communities can sort of, take advantage of this largesse, for lack of a better word, that's coming to really provide childcare for families?
I'm happy to share from a corporate perspective. I think I certainly know that many companies, private or public sector, are not able to be in a position to provide childcare. But for corporations where there is opportunity, I think stepping up the childcare that's provided, I've seen to be very, very key, and I think will continue to be key for some time as we look into the coming years ahead. So I think where that can be done and where communities can come together to help on that is for sure a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it is the thing that strikes me from working remotely and having children around, and my children are teenagers, so they're a little bit they require a little bit less direct care than your children. But there's always a part of my brain that is thinking about that. And Tracy, when my kids were younger, I remember I would be home, and so it's like, the kids are over here and I'm kind of working and they're eating, and my daughter, somebody asked what your mother does for a living, and she said, she does email, because what she would see me doing was answering emails, of course, while she's eating dinner. And so there's that mind shift is, that's a hard thing to maintain, right? Like that is very difficult to be both of those things, right? To be there for the people who work for you, for your company, to do the work you have to do, and to also be present. And I think that's, I don't know that there's an answer to that exact struggle, except for having companies like yours that are really trying to be much more deliberate about how they allow for people to spend their time.
Right. And I'm a big believer in, what are the silver linings? And if there are any silver linings we can take away from the pandemic, I think one is that companies have become more comfortable with allowing for flexible or asynchronous work, and also that we've all become more human, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been on calls, in particular late at night, where my kids come over and want to talk to the person I'm on video with, right? And then we're more human with each other, which is all about relationship building. So that's at least a positive, where we can be flexible with each other.
That's great. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I want to thank all of you so much for spending the time with us. And I know that you're still going to be around. So Tracy Wilson-Rossmann from Chariot Solutions, Tiffany Fields from Exyn, and Marissa Gilbert from Accenture. You all are totally brilliant and have great ideas that I think people here can run with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roxanne, and everyone on the panel. Awesome. I think that we touched on so many things, and I just want to reiterate at this time that this is the beginning of a conversation about racial and gender equity strategies that we as a region can, apply the 4 A's to, right? Awareness, acknowledge, accountable, and action and accountability. So I really wanted to just, say that I view this event as the beginning of implementing, strategies that can really make a difference for an inclusive economy in the future of work. At this time, we're going to launch a poll. We want to hear from the audience. We have a great, really smart and amazing people in the audience. And so we want to know, what was exactly your situation during the pandemic, work from home, and then also the question around empathy. I think a silver lining to Marissa's point is about, that there is more attention to the care and nurturing of children all the way from newborns up until teenagers, and all the anxiety and challenges they're dealing with. College kids even there's a grieving. So I think that the empathy, because we all got more in touch with our humanity, a lot of employers got in touch with our humanity and empathy, but we want to see what the poll tells us on this. So take a minute. We have about 60 folks on this meeting, which is awesome. And we want to hear from you. So if you want to take a second to launch this poll. In the meantime, I'm going to bring up our leaders for the breakout group. It looks really interesting, these results. Okay, good. We have some nice employers. Not very empathetic. Okay. We have 24 out of 45 people responding, viewing responses, 57% voted. So I'm going to move this from my screen because it's distracting me. So I can introduce the leaders of our breakout rooms. Please stay for these breakout rooms because These folks are great experts on their particular topics. First, we have Madeline Bayless, who is in a next act transition herself. Where's Madeline? Is she on the screen yet? Should I wait a second? There she is. Hi, Madeline.
Hi, how are you?
Madeline is an advocate and an advisor on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. She is a former executive at IBM and has been a great supporter of the Future Works Alliance as a founding member. And I count her as a very valuable mentor even. And next we have Sharon. Her topic, Madeline's topic, is going to be about next act career pivots. I've actually, this is not just for retirees. I've had multiple career pivots throughout my professional life and plateaus even that, affected by caretaking, affected by things you can't control. So I think that that's going to be a great breakout led by Madeline. Our next breakout leader is Sharon Clinton. Sharon Clinton is a former colleague of mine from the City of Philadelphia government. She's a Deputy Executive Director at the Mayor's Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity. She's also a servant leader, truly, author, speaker, and change agent. So she is going to lead a breakout room topic centered on racial and gender bias in the workplace and on the path to the C-suite. There's some daunting data out there and we need to get some stuff done. So Sharon's going to talk about that in the breakout room. And last but not least, we have a rising star among us. We'll focus on childcare. Sloan Kaiser is a project associate at the for the Economic and Mobility Project at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. She's recently completed a project about the business case for childcare. So Sloan is going to lead a conversation about childcare quality and access and what we can do about it. Again, I can't emphasize enough the future of work, like climate change, for example, is such a daunting, it is daunting and it can easily paralyze people into doing nothing when you look at the data, when you look at the automation trends, when you look at the pace of technology versus the pace of institutions and their ability to change. So the solutions and the pivot and the preparation will require institutions and business and government and regular citizens to design the best solutions that will take hold and be viable and make a difference. So I'm going to let the breakout rooms go. I don't know if we can see the poll anymore. Okay, hopeful poll. This tells us a lot about our audience and about our employers. So this is good. In the chat, we have, as always, questions. You can still use the chat in the breakout. When we come back from the breakout rooms, we want to hear from the folks who led those conversations about the headlines and the highlights and the bright spots and the solutions we haven't heard about. So have great conversations and let's go to the breakout rooms. We'll see you on the other end. Hi, everyone. The question of the year, can you hear me? The 2020, 2021. It was exactly a year ago today that the city of Philadelphia closed down all of their offices. And if someone had told me that where I would be a year from there, like, wow, what a year it has been, March 16, 2020 to March 16, 2021. I just came from an awesome breakout group. I have tangible to-dos like in my own career management to think about. Thanks to Sharon, I was in that group. And again, I want to reiterate before we go into the whole group discussion. First of all, I'm really excited that there's 40 people still here. This is awesome. Usually the breakout room is like, okay, I'm out. I got stuff to do, email to check. So I want to thank everyone for hanging in because this is the fun part where we get to let loose and hear what these very honest and candid conversations hopefully were about. At least in my breakout room, that was what it was about. So I'm going to toss it over to Madeline. And I just want to reiterate again, one last time before I toss it over, is that the future of work is dependent on all of our talent in the region staying in the workforce, being in a company that's empathetic, learning skills, actively upskilling themselves all the time with the help of, networks and companies where they work, that's what's going to keep our talent pool ahead of the game and help our whole metro area thrive. If we have half the women discouraged and out of the labor force, or only dipping into industries that are really late adopter industries with technology and digital transformation, then we're putting our whole metro at a disadvantage. So I'm hoping that we can think with two sides of our brains right now. One with the individual level, like how do we all get ourselves to a place of fullest potential, exercising our full potential, and serving our goals with our own careers, but also systemically, this is a powerful group to start thinking about how can we hold systems accountable for making the room, pulling up those folding chairs that the Congresswoman was talking about. That's really, today's conversation is really the beginning of that, developing a strategy for racial and gender equity in the workforce, in the labor pool, in the talent pool writ large across the region. So I'm excited to hear what the breakout rooms talked about. I'm going to toss it over to Madeline for the topic that was about next act career pivots.
Okay, thank you so much. And we had a couple of ideas that came out, and the conversation was largely around how to connect people to opportunities. So if all these women are disrupted, how do we help them make the connection? So there were several ideas about one, making sure that we surface the ideas, but the idea is that connection is engagement. So for example, is there enough promotion of how, if you've in fact been laid off or unemployed or just in that state of non-employment, do you know how to register for things that the public sector is making available through unemployment offices or labor or whatever? How do we make that public partner a private partnership so that those other kinds of registrations or support programs that are out there for rethinking, for reorienting, for reskilling, or just reapplying, that they are made available? But the key was, first and foremost, how to promote it so that you get the action from the individuals to take that first step of getting to that next act. Secondly, for those organizations that are offering programs, and we had people in our group who are part of programs like Year Up and that, they found that it was really important to target the group and to use the means to meet them where they are. And there doesn't have to be any prescription out of this, but perhaps that's the fine tuning that people need to do. And if we're all those organizations, those support organizations are aiming for the same lifting up of the region and of individuals, maybe there's some shared experiences. And the idea was, how do we help connect them? And so, and in this, mission of alliance that we have at Future Works, that was certainly very compelling to me to be able to do that. We also had just the reinforcement of networking and being able to have the persistence to examine, and whether you're choosing self-employment or stuck with that as an option or not knowing what the options are, continuously investing, having a plan, getting support. And so whether that is with an organization, if you are employed and finding your way to a next pivotal step, or having to be out of a network, but constantly creating that, and perhaps some ideas for how we help people create those networks and create the openness in this region for people approaching people new. So I'll leave it at that, because I know we need to provide some other time.
Thank you, Madeline. That was great. Obviously had a great discussion in that room. Thank you so much. That was really well organized report out. I'm going to toss it over to Sharon and our group about racial and gender bias and the path to the C-suite. Sharon, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm trying to
We hear you. You're good.
All right.
Oh, you muted yourself. So now, there you go.
There it is. Thanks for that, Anne. We had a really robust conversation around, I think, the microchasms that happen in our day-to-day work. What is happening on Zoom calls and being introduced, with women according to our attire as a hello. So, my look is a bit of your brand. We know this. But generally women don't say, oh, you look lovely when they introduce you into a room, but that can often happen from men. So what do we do in those kinds of situations? But then taking it a step further to talk about what other microaggressions are present in the workplace, how we might take additional roles, emerging roles within an organization, and kind of think through where our pockets are of women leaders and how we might flip that on its head. How do we look at roles and opportunities and widen both the sustained aspect of creating roles that women can climb the ladder with thoughtfully, sustainably, and for the long term, having a strategy that's not an initiative, that doesn't start with an end in mind, but that is created so that an agency starts with equity. I shared with the women on this call about equality can't wait and equity starts now. There is no right place. I think that folks think that they have to have all of these things in a row before we get to starting. And we don't need that. What we do need are courageous leaders, people who are willing to get with their HR leaders, their department heads, their DE&I strategists, to talk about their own experience first. What have they lacked? And then taking that information and translating that into what we will do first. What we talked about in the end is building those relationships, thinking through the competitiveness that women and men can have, but also the lack of collaboration that women have with each other in sharing their knowledge, sharing their experience and their path to the C-suite, in making room for others. So the ending question that we left out of the room is, what will you do? Where will you start? Right? Thinking through what's most important to your current department or organization, but how will you take the numbers that have been shared? And I believe a PowerPoint is coming out from the wonderful information that we had earlier, but how we might address the research and the underrepresentation of women, especially women of color, in the C-suite. It's up to us to make the change.
Thank you, Sharon. Really well said. And I think a lot of these problems, we sometimes, depending on our inclination, we look to change in the law, or we look to change in our companies, or we look to change in our own family and household structure. But it's really, all of those things are going to be required for the kind of change that we really need to get in place ASAP. We need to make progress. And a lot of these problems are, they're going to require, I love what you said about, not just an initiative, but a permanent cycle of continuous improvement and accountability, where we're okay being uncomfortable talking about the lack of progress. We have to be, and we have to recognize that a lot of these things are going to take 5 to 7 to 10 years to move the needle on. So I really appreciate the allyship that you mentioned and the advice that came out of that room. Last but not least, we are having Sloan Kaiser talk about the childcare conversation, near and dear to my heart. This topic of access to high quality childcare, so many directions that conversation could go in. I'm eager to hear about it. Go ahead, Sloan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just exactly what you said. The childcare dilemma is multifaceted. We had a great discussion. We were a little shy, but I think that just goes to show, that this issue historically has been undervalued, and it can be a little bit of an unfamiliar territory for people to have conversations about, especially with their employers. So, our goal, and I think collectively as a group of people here, is to really move this issue from one of a social issue to an economic issue, and place value and importance on accessible and affordable quality childcare as a two-generational, workforce development strategy. It allows today's workforce to access their jobs or job seekers to be able to search and look for employment, and also prepares the future of our workforce, through our children. They're tomorrow's workforce. We also discussed just the benefit of using data to demonstrate to businesses how investing in childcare can affect negatively or positively their bottom line dollar. If you are a Pennsylvania-based company, there are a number of resources. I just dropped a few in the chat that you can use to kind of demonstrate the economic losses that a company may face by not investing in childcare. And one thing that we had a discussion about is that a lot of times there's this misconception that on-site childcare is the only thing that you can do to support your employees and their childcare needs, when really there's an entire menu of options that need to just ultimately start with a conversation with your employer and with the people who need to be receiving this service. It might not be an on-site childcare center. It might be something as simple as, the ability to work from home or have an asynchronous work schedule. And a lot of times there are little wins that you can take, like doing that increase the morale and support of the parents, especially women, that a company might have. And from there, you can grow into looking at what tax credits are available. Is my company taking advantage of the tax credits that already exist? And from there, you can just grow on, maybe partnering with local providers and providing a certain amount of subsidized seats. That way you kind of avoid the liability of having an on-site care center. And there's just these building blocks that you can continue to take advantage of. But it really starts with that conversation and building on the economic importance of investing in childcare. And I'll just close with, we did have a brief discussion right at the end about the American Rescue Act and the dollars that are being invested directly into childcare, and how exciting that is. And just, I would encourage everyone to think about the role that they can play in advocating that those dollars get to the most vulnerable populations, to help ensure investment in our future workforce, but also that we are able to maintain diversity in our workplace that we've spent so long building up, over the last few decades. So.
Hey, Sloan, quick question on the child care. Oh, sorry. Was there a question from the group? Okay. Quick question. Is the child care, I should know this, but I'm guessing you know it. I'm going to put you on the spot. The child care in the rescue plan, the child care money is really significant for a sector that has super thin margins. Are those dollars going to increase childcare benefit to families or to the childcare centers and the childcare system of providers, or is it a
Sure. So the way that dollars are structured to flow out for subsidized care for families is through providers. That's currently how it's set up. So they will flow through the providers, but the annual subsidy amount in the act has increased from $2,400 to $3,600. So some experts are estimating that it can cut childcare poverty in half, depending on how the state decides to deploy the dollars. So big things are coming, and we're excited to see this investment in the sector and see, the change that it can have, and just preserving the landscape, the pre-pandemic landscape of childcare, but also progressing it even further.
Thank you, Sloan. I knew you would be on point. I really had no concern that I was putting you on the spot. So I'm going to open it up for the floor, but I think at the end of a lot of events like this, the question is like, okay, now what? Like, that was really great. And now what? And so I just want to take a few minutes to talk about, while you're thinking of questions, you can put them in the chat. I think folks are maybe discussed, what they wanted to talk about in the breakout rooms, but we're still going to stick around for a few questions here and there. But very briefly, this is, as I've said throughout the event, the beginning, and the Future Works Alliance Philadelphia exists to convene conversations like this from multiple stakeholders openly and transparently to bring different perspectives, to develop strategies that will go and be an integral part of the Future of Work playbook. So racial and gender equity in the workplace and in our regional economy is a huge part of being able to thrive through an age of rapid digital transformation that's now accelerated because of the pandemic. And so the Future Works Alliance has partnered with a company that has software that can pull together opinions of all different people asynchronously. While you're feeding your kids at dinner, you can participate in the strategic collaborations that the Future Works Alliance will do according to specific topics. And so yesterday we launched, to Madeline's point earlier in the breakouts, like we launched a strategic collaboration about communicating to displaced workers during the pandemic and communicating to lower wage and middle skill workers the opportunities that are involved in the future of work, the jobs that are future ready and will be there resiliently throughout, all of the next years of digital transformation. There's going to be big opportunity, but what are they? How do we know about them? Where can we learn more about the training that will get us into those positions? And so we're launching a strategic collaboration that will focus on designing a communication strategy that all stakeholders can contribute to the design of, and also contribute to, the dissemination of common core messages about the jobs that are future opportunities and don't require a college degree necessarily. So we launched that yesterday. And with this event here, what I would like to think about and, go back to my team and kind of mull over, and you can all reach out to me and weigh in on this if you're interested, to develop a gender equity, racial and gender equity strategy. Not every company does divulge their gender and racial numbers throughout their pipeline, right? Like they might say, oh, we have a person, they may voluntarily send that data out to shareholders, they may not. And so maybe we can develop a strategy that affords carrots and rewards companies that are doing the right things. PricewaterhouseCoopers does this, Accenture does this. There's a lot of companies who are holding themselves accountable. Wouldn't it be great for talented women looking to find a career, looking to find a home? Which companies are the better ones? Where should I take my talent? Where am I going to go, have a job and thrive? So there's a difference between different employers. That would be great information to know ahead of time. And that's something that I'm considering developing a strategy around, depending on the interest, to keep the momentum going around this event. So if you have any opinions or insights or questions about that, oh, thanks, Katie. Some kudos in the chat. Appreciate that. But without, that's what I'm thinking for the next step. Like maybe next quarter, we'll develop, you may get an invite for a strategic collaboration to create a gender equity strategy that can, do the 4 A's on this topic systemically for regional employers, and not just private sector employers, the public sector. To Sharon's point in our breakout room, the public sector has a ways to go on these things as well. All of our major employers are a mixture of private sector and public sector employers. They should all be moving the needle on racial and gender equity in their own house, right? And so that's something I think that we are in a moment, and we can do something like that together without a lot of time. We don't have to spend a lot of money in some offsite retreat or some lavish thing. The beauty of pandemic life is like we can do things virtually, and it's a lot cheaper than getting a caterer and renting a hall and all that stuff. So that's kind of the thinking about what are the next steps. I would urge all of you to go to Future Works Alliance website, which is futureworksphl.com. And also follow us on social media at #FutureWorksPHL. We have founding members joining all the time. My goal is 76 founding members. We're up to 52, and you can track that progress on our website. So again, thank you all for joining. I'm going to check the chat, make sure there's no questions. I really appreciate your time today. This is a big commitment of time. These are the passionate hearts that will affect change, and even more so exponentially and collaboratively. Doing this together has been my pleasure. Thank you so much.